The day my sister told me there was nothing left for me. She said it casually, like she was reading out a grocery list. We were sitting in her kitchen, sunlight hitting the counter, coffee untouched between us. She didn't even look guilty. She just said the estate had been settled, and that our father had trusted her to handle everything. According to her, the house was sold, the accounts were closed, and whatever inheritance I thought I had was gone. I remember laughing because it sounded ridiculous. I had taken care of our father for years. I'd moved back home when he got sick. I handled his appointments, his medications, his bills. I put my own job on hold. I burned through my savings. And now my sister was telling me I'd get nothing. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and smiled. She said I should be grateful she wasn't charging me rent for the years I lived off him. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision she'd already made. I walked out of her house with my hands shaking and my stomach hollow. I didn't know it yet, but she'd already started celebrating. And she had no idea how temporary that smile was. Within a week, the humiliation became public. My sister told relatives that I'd expected a handout, and was angry when I didn't get one. She framed it like greed, like entitlement. At a family dinner I wasn't invited to, she joked about how some people confuse caregiving with ownership. People laughed. I stopped correcting anyone. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't have proof. On paper, she was the executor. She had the documents. She had the authority. And she used it like a shield. I asked her for copies of the will. She told me to talk to a lawyer if I wanted them. Then she blocked my number. That was the moment it stopped being about money. It became about erasure. Years of sacrifice rewritten as selfishness. Just because she could control the story. What hurt most was how confident she was. She started renovating her house. Posted photos online. New floors. New furniture. Comments poured in congratulating her for finally catching a break. I was sleeping on a friend's couch, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with our father, wondering if I'd imagined his promises. But one detail kept coming back to me. A letter he'd mentioned over and over, that he'd told me never to open unless something went wrong. At the time, I'd thought he was being dramatic. Now I wasn't so sure. The letter was in a storage box I hadn't touched since the funeral. It was sealed, my name written in his shaky handwriting. Seeing it made my chest tighten. I sat on the floor and opened it with my hands trembling. Inside was not a confession or an apology. It was instructions. Clear, deliberate instructions. He wrote that he didn't trust my sister to be fair. He said she'd pressured him about money while he was sick. He warned me not to confront her directly. And then he referenced something called a supplemental trust file, filed separately, meant to activate only if I was excluded. That was the first time hope scared me. Because hope meant responsibility. I didn't rush to a lawyer. I reread the letter 3 times, then locked it away. I knew if I moved too fast she'd sense it. And if she sensed it, she'd cover her tracks. Instead, I started quietly learning. I read about probate timelines. About executor limits. About how amendments are filed and where they're stored. Every night, while my sister posted photos of her fresh start, I was building a map of how she thought she'd won. What she didn't know was that arrogance leaves footprints. And she was leaving them everywhere. 3 months later, my sister called me for the first time since blocking me. Her tone was cheerful, almost kind. She said she was finalizing everything and needed my signature to close the estate cleanly. She told me it was just a formality. That's when I knew she was nervous. Executors don't chase signatures unless something can reopen. I told her I'd review whatever she sent. She laughed and said I was overthinking things like always. The document arrived by email that night. It was a release. Signing it would mean I accepted the distribution as complete. No claims. No disputes. No future action. I didn't respond. Instead, I compared dates, file numbers, and wording from the letter my father wrote. One phrase stood out: a trust addendum stored with a different registrar. Executors often miss those, especially when they're in a hurry. I filed a simple request the next morning. No accusations, no confrontation, just a records inquiry. When the confirmation email came back, I had to sit down. The addendum existed. It had been activated automatically upon exclusion. My sister hadn't just hidden my inheritance. She'd triggered a process she couldn't stop. And she had no idea it was already moving. Exactly 48 hours later, her lawyer contacted me. The tone was very different from my sister's. Careful, formal, curious. They asked if I was represented. I said no, not yet. That silence on the line told me everything. The trust addendum didn't just name me. It restricted the executor's discretion and required a full accounting. Any unexplained transfer would be flagged. Any early distribution could be reversed. And there were penalties for misrepresentation. I still didn't tell my sister. I let her keep posting. Let her keep spending. Let her keep assuming she was untouchable. Because the process works best when the person who made the mess keeps digging. A week later, she sent another message asking if I'd signed the release. I replied with one sentence: "I'm waiting on confirmation from the registry." She didn't respond. But I could imagine the shift, the first crack in that confidence. She had built her victory on speed and silence. Now everything was slowing down. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't desperate. I was patient. And the best part was this: the reckoning wouldn't happen in private. It would happen in a room full of witnesses, with documents on the table. She thought the story was over, it was just getting started. The first mistake my sister made was talking too much. She called an aunt to complain about delays, and how I was being difficult again. What she didn't realize was that the same aunt forwarded the message to me, almost apologetically. It wasn't malicious, just careless. And it confirmed what I already suspected. My sister didn't know why things were slowing down, only that they were. Behind the scenes, the registry had frozen further distributions. Her access wasn't revoked, but every movement now required justification. That's how these things work. Not dramatic, just quietly suffocating. She texted me again, this time less friendly. She said I was embarrassing the family, that I was dragging things out for attention. I replied calmly, asking for copies of the final accounting. She didn't send them. Instead, she posted a photo that same night. A vacation shot, drink in hand, captioned about freedom after years of stress. The timing was intentional. It was meant for me. I saved the post. Dates matter, especially when money is involved. And I had a feeling that trip was going to become very relevant very soon. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived at my temporary address. It wasn't from my sister. It was from the Trust's Oversight Office. They were requesting clarification on a series of withdrawals made shortly after our father's death. Large ones. Rounded numbers. No listed purpose. I wasn't being accused of anything. But she was about to be. I responded with exactly what they asked for. A copy of my father's letter, a timeline of my caregiving expenses, and a brief statement that I had not received any distribution or reimbursement. No emotion. No commentary. Just facts. That same evening my sister finally called. Her voice was tight, controlled. She asked what I'd sent. I told her the truth. Only what was requested. She accused me of trying to ruin her. I said nothing. Silence makes people reveal more than anger ever could. She started talking faster, justifying expenses I hadn't mentioned. Renovations. Travel. Things Dad wanted. She hung up abruptly when she realized she'd said too much. For the first time since the funeral, I slept through the night. Because I knew something she didn't. Explanations given too early always come back later. and they rarely match. The family meeting happened without warning. My sister called everyone together to clear the air. She wanted witnesses, she just chose the wrong moment. She spoke first, presenting herself as calm and responsible. She said delays were due to paperwork issues and my refusal to cooperate. Then she turned to me, expecting an apology or at least embarrassment. Instead, I asked one question. I asked why the trust addendum hadn't been disclosed at the start. The room went quiet. She said she'd never heard of it. That's when I slid a printed confirmation across the table. Registry stamp and date visible. She didn't pick it up. Her husband did. He read it twice. Slowly. That was the moment her control cracked. Not loudly. Just enough for everyone to see it. She tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably nothing. But nobody echoed her. The meeting ended early. People left without hugging her. Without reassurance. That night, I received a message from her husband asking if we could talk privately. I didn't reply. I already had what I needed, doubt. And once doubt enters a room, it doesn't leave quietly. 3 days later, her lawyer formally withdrew. That detail mattered more than anything else. Lawyers don't walk away unless risk outweighs reward. A court date was set to review the accounting. Routine, they called it. But routines don't usually make people panic. My sister called non-stop. Left voicemails that swung between anger and pleading. She said we could split things fairly now. That word now told me everything. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the process needed space to work. Interference muddies outcomes. At the hearing, she arrived overdressed and overconfident. I arrived early, sat quietly, and let the documents speak. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He asked questions my sister couldn't answer without contradicting herself. The vacation. The renovations. Timing. Her smile lasted less than a minute. The accounting was ordered redone. Independently. With penalties pending review. The estate wasn't closed anymore. It was wide open. And for the first time, she wasn't in control of the timeline. After the hearing, we didn't speak. Not in the hallway. Not in the parking lot. She left quickly, eyes forward, phone already pressed to her ear. I sat on the courthouse steps longer than I needed to. Not because I was celebrating, but because I felt something lift. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The revised accounting took weeks. Each update stripped away another layer of the story she'd built. By the time it was finished, there was no argument left. The trust addendum wasn't a loophole. It was a safeguard. One my father had anticipated carefully. The ruling was simple. Funds misallocated would be returned. Executor authority would be reassigned. Additional review would follow. No drama. No lecture. Just consequence. My sister didn't look at me when it was read aloud. Later that night, I received a short message from her. No apology. Just one sentence. I didn't think you'd actually follow through. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I didn't think I'd need to, I wrote. There were still things unresolved. Still fallout coming. But the story had shifted. And this time, it wasn't her version that mattered. Once the executor role was reassigned, the tone of everything changed. People who had avoided me for months suddenly reached out, cautiously at first. Cousin asked how I was holding up. An uncle apologized for assuming things. No one mentioned my sister directly, but her absence from these conversations said enough. The new executor requested interviews with both of us. Mine was brief. I answered questions, provided receipts, explained timelines. Hers lasted nearly 3 hours. When she came out, her face was pale, her confidence replaced by something brittle. That evening, she posted nothing online for the first time in months. No photos. No captions. Just silence. What surprised me wasn't her distress. It was how quickly her allies disappeared. People like confidence, not controversy. And once doubt becomes official, it spreads faster than truth ever did. I wasn't enjoying this. I noticed that about myself. I felt steady, almost detached. Justice doesn't feel like triumph when you've already grieved the relationship. But the process wasn't finished. The audit had expanded. And with it came questions no one had expected to ask out loud. The audit uncovered something small but fatal. A transfer made before our father's death, authorized while he was hospitalized. The signature was shaky. The timing was wrong. It didn't look criminal at first glance. Just questionable. That was enough. The oversight office flagged it for review. My sister insisted our father had approved it verbally. The problem with verbal approvals is that they leave no witnesses. And this one contradicted written instructions he'd made later. At a follow-up hearing, the judge didn't accuse her of intent. He didn't need to. He asked why the transfer hadn't been disclosed initially. She said she forgot. Forgetting isn't a defense when you're in charge. The room was quiet when the recommendation was read. Partial forfeiture of executor compensation and referral for further review. Not punishment, accountability. I watched her hands grip the table. This wasn't the collapse she'd imagined. It was worse. Low. Administrative. Impossible to argue with. Outside, she finally looked at me and asked if I was satisfied. I told her the truth. I said this wasn't about satisfaction. It was about finishing what she'd started. She turned away without replying. The revised distribution arrived by mail. I opened it alone, at the same table where I'd once read my father's letter. The numbers weren't life-changing. They were fair, balanced. Exactly what he'd intended. What mattered more was the final clause. Reimbursement for documented caregiving expenses. Years of effort acknowledged, line by line. Not emotionally, officially. I didn't call anyone to celebrate. I sat quietly and let it settle. Closure isn't loud. My sister didn't contest the outcome. She couldn't. But the damage didn't stop at the estate. Her reputation, once polished and confident, now carried an asterisk. People remembered the delays, the hearings, the silence. Weeks later, her husband filed for separation. I heard about it from someone else. He never contacted me again. I felt sadder than I expected. Not for her marriage, but for how thoroughly greed had hollowed things out. The process was nearly over. But there was one final reckoning neither of us had anticipated. The letter my father wrote had included one more instruction I hadn't acted on yet. He'd asked me to deliver a copy to the family once everything was resolved. Not before. Not during. After. I mailed it the same day the estate officially closed. No commentary. No explanation. Just his words. Reactions came quietly. A voicemail from an aunt crying. A message from a cousin saying they finally understood. No one forwarded it to my sister. She would have received it directly. 2 days later she showed up at my door. No anger this time. No confidence. She asked why he hadn't trusted her. I didn't answer right away. I told her trust isn't revoked in one moment. It erodes, slowly, often unnoticed by the person causing it. She nodded like that explanation hurt more than accusation. Then she left. No apology. But no excuses either. That was enough for me. Life didn't transform overnight. I didn't move into a bigger place or post about new beginnings. I rebuilt quietly, found steady work, paid off debts, slept better. The inheritance didn't give me joy, gave me peace, and that was worth more. My sister and I don't speak now. Not because of anger but because some distances are necessary. I don't know if she learned what she needed to. I only know I did. What stays with me isn't the betrayal. It's the letter. The reminder that preparation is an act of love, and that justice doesn't require cruelty, just patience. People still ask how I stayed calm through all of it. I tell them the truth. When someone underestimates you, the best response isn't noise, it's follow-through. The weeks after the estate closed were strangely empty. No calls from lawyers. No deadlines. No messages asking me to explain myself. For the first time in years, nothing needed defending. That silence felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. I'd lived so long bracing for the next accusation that calm felt like something I hadn't earned yet. I started sorting through my father's old things properly. Not for documents this time, just memories. Notes in books. Receipts tucked into drawers. Evidence of a careful man who hated waste and loved order. It made sense now why he'd planned the trust the way he did. He wasn't choosing sides. He was preventing damage. That realization softened something in me. I stopped replaying conversations with my sister. Stopped drafting imaginary responses. The story no longer needed revisions. Closure didn't arrive as relief. It arrived as acceptance. And acceptance, I learned, is quieter than justice. My sister tried to re-enter the narrative through other people. A cousin mentioned she hoped we could talk someday. An aunt said family should heal. I listened without committing to anything. Healing isn't a group project. What struck me was how carefully people phrased her situation now. They avoided the word mistake. They used misunderstanding, pressure, stress. It was an attempt to soften accountability without denying it outright. I didn't correct them. I didn't agree either. Silence let the facts stand where they were. I realized then that part of my growth was letting others be uncomfortable with unresolved endings. Not every story needs reconciliation to feel complete. Some just need truth to stop being hidden. Focused on building routines. Work. Exercise. Sleep. Normality felt like a reward I could finally keep. The reimbursement check arrived last. I almost missed it, mixed in with regular mail. When I opened it, I didn't feel excitement. I felt validated. Those years hadn't vanished into someone else's narrative. They existed on paper now. Undeniable. I deposited it and moved on. No announcement. No explanation. Later that night, I received a message from my sister. Just 3 words. I got the letter. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted the upper hand, but because the conversation she wanted wasn't one I could finish for her. Some realizations don't need witnesses. That was the last message she ever sent me. Months passed. The family found a new rhythm without forcing us into the same rooms. Holidays adjusted. Invitations became optional. No one pushed. I noticed how often people assume revenge stories end with dominance. Someone losing everything. Someone else winning loudly. That's not how real accountability works. Doesn't erase relationships. Redraws boundaries. My sister wasn't ruined. She wasn't triumphant either. She was visible. In a way she hadn't been before. And I was finally invisible again. Which turned out to be exactly what I wanted. I changed apartments. Not because I needed space, but because I wanted a chapter with no associations. New keys. New routes. New mornings. Sometimes I thought about how close I'd come to signing that release just to make the discomfort stop. How easily everything could have ended differently. Not unjustly, just incomplete. That thought stayed with me. It made me gentler with myself. And less impressed by people who rush outcomes. Patience hadn't been a strategy at first. It had been survival. But it became strength once I trusted it. A year later, I found my father's letter again while organizing files. I read it once more, slower this time. What stood out wasn't the warning. It was the care. The way he anticipated outcomes without malice. I understood then that preparation isn't pessimism. It's protection. That lesson stayed with me more than the inheritance ever could. People sometimes ask if I'd do anything differently. If I'd confront my sister sooner. If I demand explanations, I wouldn't. Confrontation would have fed the version of the story she needed to believe. Evidence didn't. Truth doesn't argue. Wait. I don't follow my sister's life now. Not out of spite, but because I don't need updates to feel settled. What mattered has already happened. The rest is just living. If there's a moral here, it isn't about winning. It's about not surrendering your reality just because someone louder rewrites it. I learned that documents outlast opinions. That patience exposes arrogance. And that peace doesn't arrive when someone else falls. It arrives when you stop needing them to. I keep my father's letter in a folder now. Not a box. Not hidden. Not displayed. Just accessible. It reminds me that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't anger or forgiveness. It's follow-through.